for coming in tonight. If I look like I'm standing rather awkwardly up here, it's not just because I'm standing in front of people. I spent 3 hours at the physical therapist today, and I'm being told to get my back straight, chest out, neck in like this. So that's what's going on up here. I'm trying to get my neck and shoulders in situation. But one of the things that strikes me is that I'm talking about stuff that's not really Java, right? It's stuff you might do with Java, but it's not Java. It's an application, perhaps, of Java, but it needn't be. And I'd like to understand who we have in the audience. I think I've spoken actually perhaps once before, about 5-6 years ago at CJO, but not since. And that would have been J2EE kind of world that I came from. But I've forgotten what the makeup of this group is. Are we mostly app devs, like back-end app devs, writing app services and web servicey kind of stuff? Maybe J2EE kind of applications? Maybe like just a web container rather than EJB container? And then how many of us are into the operations side of things, sysadmins and things like that? Okay, so keeping web farms up and running and managing networks and things like that. Okay, so what about front-end developers? So we're dealing with like Dojo and maybe some JavaScript and maybe some Flash in there or something. Certainly keeping an eye on HTML5. Okay. All right, so there's quite a blend. All right. So what I wanted to talk tonight about is situational application platforms. And the way this presentation came together was IBM has an outreach program with universities, and in particular a university in South Africa, Stellenbosch University, and we were giving them classes in web application development. And this was just a module from that course that we provided them, which is why it has a different date on it than today. Okay. So, this is what we're going to talk about tonight. What is a situational application platform? So we can talk about how to assess them and how to build one. What makes a good one? And as part of that, we have to get into the nitty-gritty of what is a situational application and understand that and the mind of the person who's trying to use the platform, what their objectives are, and things like that. So let's get into that. So what is a situational application? Everybody's heard different terms, different definitions of this, and my preference is to think about it from the perspective of the person who's writing the situational application. And the thing that makes it situational is that I just did it. I didn't think about it. I didn't worry about non-functional requirements. I didn't think about whether it was going to get a return on investment. I didn't have to build a business case before I built this thing. I just went and did it. And I didn't sit there and think about breaking out entity relationship diagrams and thinking about application components and how, breaking up the application like that. I just sat down and started coding. Now, coding is kind of a loaded word. Coding is something a developer would do, but situational applications aren't always built by coders, right? So if we have a look at some of the situational application platforms that I've listed there, spreadsheets, right? The most popular situational application platform on the planet is a spreadsheet, right? So people go out there, and oftentimes what they're doing with their situational application is just modeling data, it's gathering data, it's modeling it, establishing some relationships between the attributes that they're modeling. So they'll say, put in an equation that says that column 3 equals column 2 plus column 1 or something like that. So they're creating a model and they're using it concurrently. So it's a fairly elementary situational application, but they own it, right? They own the application. They don't have to go and have someone else build it for them. It's theirs, and that's one of the things that makes situational applications attractive to people, is that they're completely comfortable in the domain of the application and they're just building it. And so that's something that distinguishes some of the typical application development that we see, especially in our Java lives, where you're supporting a business function, right? Somebody's come to you and said, I need this application built, and now we have this separation of the person who needs the application from the person who can deliver it. So if we have a look at some of the application platforms I've listed there, databases, collaboration suites. I don't know if anybody's had any access to like a Lotus Domino and the scripting that goes along with that environment. But I had a real wake-up moment because I'm born Java, thinking C++ before that and whatnot, and I'm really into it. And there's nothing we can't do best in web development and all that sort of stuff. And I was in working for IBM for a long time. I was in London, and we had like a week off that we had determined that we were going to use this in our lab as a kind of a development week that we would just learn new stuff. And so we got a lot of consultants in from the field, and we were in this lab, and we said, as every consulting lab does, let's build a consulting lab management program, right? So we're going to have like who's where and scheduling and all that stuff and all gigs. It'll be great. And we sat there and we whiteboarded, and we're going to have like we've got to have redundancy and failover and security, and this is how we're going to architect a whole operational model, and then the application's going to have these components, and we're getting all into it and stuff. And we had to figure out hosts to deploy it on and all these different things. And the manager in the room, who was like an old Lotus hack, right? So he's kind of got lost interest in the conversation. He's wandered off. And we broke for lunch, and we went and had lunch, and we came back in and sat down, and we said, okay, now where do we leave off? And how are we gonna? What's the next step in this? And the manager said, "Oh, I built it. I've got it all." Oh, you can't have. What are you going to do with security? Yeah, I've got it's linked into the corporate LDAP system. But where are you going to deploy it? Well, the servers are already deployed, and the application's already distributed across the world. But how's it going to scale? Well, it's already running 100. Lots of applications. It's going to be fine. It's like, oh crap! There are faster ways to get stuff done than building out a web farm and getting all that stuff. And this is the nature of the cloud, right? Where we have stuff that's already being done, already being deployed, already running, and we're kind of operating at a different level, where we can just go in there and start making use of some of these services that already exist. And Lotus Domino was like that, is like that, and it's just another paradigm for building applications that you want to be aware of. Mashup editors and so on. So here's a little bit of a graph here where I've called out applications, right? And I've tried to break them out in terms of, is it task-focused or general purpose? Is it limited features and control? I can basically only do a little bit with it. So like a spreadsheet, right? You have complete control of one tiny aspect of an application, the data model. A little bit of function you can build in with macros and so on. But basically, it's limited features, but very general purpose. And at the other end of the spectrum, you might have something like the Mathematica environment, which allows you to build very task-focused and very sophisticated mathematical models and relationships between information. So these are all platforms, and then what makes a platform situational or not is dependent on the person, right? A platform is situational if the user of the platform says it is. If the person, like for example, I'm particularly good with C. If I need something done and it's a fairly small application, I can sit down without any design or anything like that and just bang out a C application to do it. And so C is a situational application platform for somebody who's a C expert. Same with Bash, shell scripting, whatever it is. But if you're not, if you are comfortable in the business space, then C is not a situational application platform for you, but maybe a spreadsheet is. So let's have a look then at what we might consider the aspects of the task model. I think this is language that you guys are familiar with, right? These are the things that really constitute the application. You've got the data model that's underpinning the application task. You've got the flow and the process and the collaboration. What are you going to? How does logic flow through the application? Decisions and rules that get performed along the way, that get made along the way. The interface. Event definition and handling, reporting, monitoring, and then I've got this catch-all at the end, which is function. This is stuff that didn't fit into any of the other categories, right? So let's have a look at how a data model might surface in a situational way. How would you surface a data model in a situational way? And this is, obviously a spreadsheet, right? So basically, there's no distinction between the modeling or the creating of the application and the using of the application. And this is something that's going to come up again as we look at situational application platforms. One thing that's very foreign to most people, although we're all very comfortable with it, is this separation of design, model, build, deploy, from use, right? They sit down and they see Microsoft Word and it just goes. And you just type in words and then you close it. And you don't have to like model your Word document and then go use the model and build it. It just works. And that's how people expect it to work. So they model in Excel by naming a column, and then they use it by filling in the columns. And then if they want to change the model, they add another title, and then they can fill in the data. And it just happens very naturally. There's no separation. There's no learning curve. They don't have to grok another concept, right? Fewer concepts that somebody has to grok, the better for acceptance and uptake of your application platform. Flow. So I've given a couple of aspects of examples of flow here, how flow can be built into an application in a way that's compatible with a business kind of audience. Has anyone seen Prezi? Does anyone know what Prezi is? Prezi is awesome. Everybody with their hand down, go figure out what Prezi is. Prezi is very cool. So what this is basically saying here is that I'm going to start by zooming in on my presentation on this word, how to harvest your vermicompost. And then when I click advance or whatever, it's going to spin this around and it's going to zoom in on these words over here. I can't even see what that says anymore. But and then when I click next, it's going to zoom in on this, and you get this really dynamic, flowy kind of presentation thing going on. But it's all within context, because as it's moving from this to this, it kind of zooms out, and you can still see the relationship between the concepts. But I'm constructing a flow through these concepts with the tool, through the web browser, and it's free. You need to use that stuff. Other examples of flow are, I'm controlling here what happens in my, and I think this might be a Google app. I'm not even sure anymore where I got it from. It may even be Amazon or something like that. But I'm controlling in the path of the execution of whatever I'm using that application from. I'm inserting extra steps, right? I'm inserting a notification step. And then obviously more sophisticated rule management and flow management, I should say, for situations where that's appropriate. So if you have a business analyst, and the business analyst wants to model the flow of a procedure or a process in an organization, that's what they're comfortable with. That's what they can use. But that's not, most people, in fact, this surprised me. We were doing some research on trying to reach that business user, writing user interfaces that were compatible with a non-technical audience. And because we've come from a technical background, we think that everybody likes directed graphs, right? We think flowcharts, and we think about, BPMN diagrams and all kinds of cool stuff, right? They don't. In fact, it surprised us that a lot of people who you would have thought would dig flowcharts said, no, text. I just want text. Maybe some kind of sticky note, card deck. They use the word card deck to refer to just like a sequence of blocks. But as soon as you started having iterations, or you started to have any kind of directed graphy stuff going on, that's someone else's job. That's not my job. So bear that in mind, that a lot of things that we have taken for granted are not compatible with different audiences. And so a theme that's going to come up again and again is know your target audience. And preferably, you remember that graph we had on before? If you're at the edge that says it's general purpose, much harder task ahead of you than if you're at the end of very task-focused. If you're in task-focused land, right, then you can assist the user a lot more. You don't have to ask questions as much because you know what they're trying to do because you're task-focused. And so you can really accelerate them getting to done. One of the things that the Harmonix, the CEO of Harmonix, said in a New York Times interview that he did recently, he made that one of those games like Guitar Hero or something band, rock band, whatever. So one of those two things. And he was talking about, how, because where he came from before that was a much more creative game where you had to play actual notes on something that recorded your notes on the guitar more, and it involved a lot more creativity. And for someone who's in music, which was his background, he thought that was going to be the hit because it allowed a lot more expressive freedom to the people playing the games. Turned out people choked on it. People choked on the freedom of expression. And his quote was, if you give people what it turns out to be, from their perspective, a blank canvas and a bunch of paint and a paintbrush, they don't know how to proceed from that. It's too hard. He said the thing to make it your interface with a person successful is give them very clear objectives and very clear success and failure criteria. If you do, this is what you're trying to achieve. If you do this, you will win and get there. If you do that, you will fail. So now the person says, okay, don't do that, do this, and try to get there. And they know, and they can take the first step. If you don't give them that very explicit instructions, then they're just stuck. So rules, right? So we have now decisions and rules in the spreadsheet. Obvious case, now we've got a column. We've changed our data model. We've got a column at the end now that is has a relationship to some other columns in the database, and then some other examples of rules. But once again, very specific to the task at hand, and then it's understandable. If you talk to me about like accounting terminology and what have you, it's going to be hard for me to progress, right? But if you talk to an accountant and you're building an application for accountants, then you have to include their jargon, you have to include their things that they're trying to do to make it useful for them. User interface is a little bit tricky. Obviously, you want to constrain what a person can do. A person, like this is an example here from Google, I guess, and I'm changing the layout of my email client in Google. I can add various components. I don't get to, like, I mean, there is probably ways that I can build my own component, but you know, the average user is going to want to say, oh yeah, you know, I love that feature where it's, did you mean Jack? You know, there's various cool additions you can put into your Gmail client where it's like, you type in Bill and it fills in the rest of the name, and you type in Sam and whatnot, and then you type in Jack, but you've hit Jack Smith instead of Jack Jones, and it looks back through your email history and it goes, usually you include Jack Jones with those other two people. Didn't you mean Jack Jones this time? And you go, oh yeah, I did mean Jack Jones, and it corrects it for you, right? And then there's this other plugin you can add in which says, you know, what about Jack? You know, and where it's like filled in Sam and Smith, and then all these listed names that normally go in with that same collection of people, and I just start going click, 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 and I'm done, right? So I have control over what my interface looks like, but I'm not coding, you know, I'm just adding this like checkbox, yes, no kind of thing, and that's the level that I can operate in that environment. So I do have some control over the user interface, but at a level that's appropriate to my skill set for the environment. This is another interesting example where we have taken a spreadsheet. It's looked at your spreadsheet and I've said, you know, I need to capture this information. So I looked at the model that we had, like on the previous slide, and it said, oh, look at that. It looks like you're interested in items, cost per unit, number of units, and then I'll calculate the total cost. And I can hit a button and have it generate a form. Not that this is associated with that, but it'll say then, you know, cost per unit, number of units, and so on. And I can indicate to it that I want to fill this table out with information, and it will generate a form for me to capture the information that I've modeled in the spreadsheet. So assistive technologies like that allow me to build a user interface, even though I'm not a user interface builder, say, that's where we need to go. And then once again, it's targeting the skill set and the task at hand for the person who's going to use your platform. I'm happy to take any questions along the way if people are still, you know, with me. And if you're not, then let me know and I'll see what we can do. So the simplest events, time-based, yeah, so, you know, what's an event? All kinds of definitions for what constitutes an event. You know, I've got a little bit of an at script going there, an at job running. Obviously, it's going to pop up and do something at a particular time, changing notification rules and so on. As you get into more sophisticated event systems, then you know you're going to have more sophisticated rules and whatnot to define those events and associate behavior with the events and so on. But that's That's a trivial one there before. Monitoring, reporting, this is something that's often overlooked, but gathering information along the way, being able to build a system to have it be managed. We all think about that when we're doing our Java applications, building for management, building for operations, that sort of thing, not just for the front end, but for the back end of the team as well. Same applies to situational applications. What kind of metrics are interesting to the people who are going to be using your platform? And how do we need to be rendering that stuff? And how configurable can we make it, right? There's some tools that various companies have. IBM's flavor of it is called Cognos, Business Intelligence, but there's Business Objects, there's other ones that different companies have. And, you can, once it's properly configured by the sysadmins and the technical people at the back end and have surfaced up various feeds of information, the way a business user can just drag and drop feeds and have them cross-correlate real-time, dragging into a browser, into this Flash application running inside a browser, and it'll just you drag in the geo feed on top of your sales data, and suddenly your sales data is all split out by geo, and then you can drag in temporal information and say, by a month or a calendar, and it'll split it, dice it, and there's all this cubic stuff going on behind it. There are really sophisticated ways to allow end users to be creating all kinds of variants on reports and stuff. And so, if that's what's needed, then then there are proof points that says that can be done. And obviously, rather than go ahead and try to rebuild that stuff, you'd want to leverage some of that technology and just surface it up. And it's already rendered in a way that's readily incorporated into a web-based environment. Function. This is just the leftover bits, right? So we broke out all of those other categories which are kind of discrete, but then developers actually contribute more to the code than just those discrete pieces. There'll be something that's specific to the task at hand, and I just called that function. It may be activating a piece of technology. It may be integrating with some other system. It may be some piece of technical solution that needed to happen, like a mathematical equation or something that wasn't able to be modeled with those other components. But it's very task specific, so I couldn't break it out any further than just the function, the rest of the stuff that needs to be written. And that typically, depending on your skill set, this I think was part of a Google expansion, a way to extend Google Docs. So you can actually write macros. I'm not even sure what dialect it is that's up there. Maybe JavaScript, maybe it's Python. But obviously, depending on your skill set, you can be extending the functional component with an appropriate language there. Yeah.
So it seems that the whole idea of a situational application platform is to take your problem, particularly the reconfiguration part, which is dull and boring, and make it something that the user does. So in effect, the programmer gets out of the picture except for maintaining the platform. Is that?
All right, that's a tremendous observation here. I'll just restate that. The objective of the situational application platform is to take as much of the problem and solve it ahead of time to create the platform, and then have the user of the platform have their own little playground which sits kind of above and distinct from and detached from an IT involvement. And that's a correct observation. Yeah. And we're seeing that happen in different ways, right? Where the situationalness of the solution, it varies, right? And it's an abstraction problem that it's a road that we've been marching on forever, right? We had hardware, and then you had to write code to the hardware, and then we said, well, let's have a BIOS layer, and then you wrote to the BIOS layer, and someone else dealt with below the BIOS, and then we said, well, let's have an operating system, and all the way up. And this is just another continuation of that evolution, targeting a different user set, right? So now we're saying that depending on who the user set is, how high do we have to build that quiescent layer that's the constant thing that they can have a sandbox and play in above. All right, so what makes a good one? Now that we've kind of defined some aspects of the situational application platform, how do we judge one against another?
What about modularity, or being able to bundle things from the perspective of a situational application platform implementation. Is so you define the platform, you define the problem and a possible solution to it, kind of building a tool. I don't know if there's a tool that already exists or not, but building a tool that addresses the needs of the users. I assume modularity would be something that you want in there in terms of being able to bundle all the components together, being able to move them around in different environments and things like that. Can you speak to that a little bit at all, if that's a concern or?
Okay, so the observation was that, is modularity still a consideration? Given that we're talking about building this platform, that things are going to change above it, do we need to have different pluggable modules into the platform? Yes, that's, I think modularity and containment is always a good thing to aim for, even if it's just to allow the platform to have parts of the platform to evolve independently of other parts of the platform. One of the things that we've been thinking about in building platforms in IBM is how do you, it's whenever you have a modular kind of system, like in cell phones with OSGI and in Java, in operating systems with DLLs, in any time when you have these potential for modules to either exist or not, then you have these dependencies which may or may not be satisfied and whatnot. So you have to play a little bit of a best guess kind of thing, where maybe there's like a base set of modules which are core and have to always be there, and then if somebody has some application that they want to develop that has a dependency, then there needs to be a mechanism for satisfying that dependency. So there's some, I think modularity is always the right thing to do, just from a development management perspective, but you do run into some issues in terms of not breaking things and whatnot if you allow parts of the platform to either be there or not. All right. So these are things that these points that I've got here on the slide are things that have come up through the conversation already. But basically, the most important takeaway is know your user. Know who it is that the platform is targeting. Because once you know who the user is, you have to know what their skill set is, you have to know what their disposition is. Do they think it's their job? Right? Even if they could do this, would they do this? Because you could build an application that the end user would be capable of if they put their mind to it, but if they don't see it as their job, so you have to do studies and figure out if that is the case, that people will use the platform. And then understand the language that they use, right? This is being built for them. If you are writing an application for a bank and it's going to be in the domain of retail mortgages and so on, then have a collection of features and functions that they can play with that are at the level that they're used to dealing with. So don't give them a math function if that's not what they want to play with. Give them a loan amortization function, and give them like levels of granularity at the level that they speak at, rather than too high or too low a level of granularity. Understanding the barriers to adoption, right? So for example, one of the things that came up was Google's doing a really good job right now of getting into organizations by the back door, right? Every organization has purchase policies and whatnot that says if you want to buy a new piece of software and install it onto your machine, then you have to go through the procurement department, and there's all this bureaucracy to deal with. So what about if it just runs in your browser and you don't have to install anything on your machine? Maybe people will use your stuff then. And what's happening is that, unbeknownst to IT, you got all these people in the organization out there using Salesforce, and they're out there using Google Docs, and they're out there using all these other web services because they can, right? And because they don't have to go and talk to IT, as people who always want money and bureaucracy, it just works and it just goes in. So understand the barriers to adoption for the user group so that you can make sure that you can get around that. Security and privacy. There was a time when the web was good for static content, and that was about it, and people were all worried about it. And now, speaking for myself and probably everybody in the room, we're doing banking online and doing all kinds of stuff that matter. and we're all comfortable with it. And you know, it's not really about security and privacy, right? What it's really about is business control. It's really about, you know, look at what happened with WikiLeaks, right? You had a situation there where there was a business agreement between the WikiLeaks people and Amazon, let's say. I'm not even sure if it was exactly Amazon, but I think it was. Where WikiLeaks was using Amazon to host some of their backup material. At some point, Amazon, for whatever reasons Amazon determined was the right thing, decided to end the business relationship and stop offering the service to WikiLeaks. Now, if you're WikiLeaks, or if you're a bank and you're watching this, and you say, gee, if I go depending on Amazon for my computational needs, for my data storage, for my whatever, and they, for whatever reasons they determine, don't like me doing that at some point, am I just off the web? Have I just like stopped operating? And this is what they're thinking. It's not like, you know, it's fairly well understood that technically it's possible to provide security and privacy. The problem is getting over the fact that I don't have control of it once I have a dependency on somebody else. So even though people talk about security and privacy as being issues right now, that's not really the problem. The problem is business control over your operations. And you know, we don't all set up our own communication channels like we used to, right? There was a time when people would set up their own communication channels between branch offices and stuff like that. Now we just use the internet. You know, every phone conversation in America is being monitored by the government. So it can be monitored by others too. But we still use the phone system. You know, I don't know. Personally, I think that people will get over this. I think what's going to happen is that people will see the advantages that it's offering their competition, and they'll get over it and just use the internet services. All right. I want to spend a little bit of time now talking about that mindset that I talked about previously, which is to say that oftentimes the users of situational applications don't think of themselves as being in the application programming business. They think of themselves as using a spreadsheet, or you know, using Mathematica or something, and there's no separation, or there's no concept of an application lifecycle like we in the Java development community think of it. So, you know, think about that, and you know, how to. There are reasons why we have an application lifecycle, right? So we can't just say that it's not important. What we have to do is make it implicit. Okay, so. Like using Google Docs, right? I'm going to keep coming back to that because it's a good example. I don't have to press save when I use Google Docs. But that doesn't mean that I've lost the ability to go to a previous revision, right? As was designed by Alan Cooper in his book in 1992 or 93 about Microsoft Windows 95. He said, listen, you know, why do we even have a save function in word processors? That's foreign to people. You know, people who are not natively weaned on this technology wonder why they have to tell the computer to save when, you know, if you write it on a piece of paper, you don't have to say, okay, paper, now save. I mean, it's there and it's saved. And the reason we have it in the computing environment is because we've separated the view of something from the actual persistence of something, and then to connect the two again, we put a button on that says save, and then we added this extra concept that people had to grok to be able to use the word processor. That's gone away again in Google Docs, right? So in Google email and all the rest of it. So you just type stuff, and periodically it just saves and saves and saves. But you haven't lost revisions because it's generating a revision history and so on, and you can go back, and so you haven't lost any functionality. It's just made that life cycle, that saving cycle, implicit rather than explicit. And it's the same thing here. We want to be able to do things like allow you to come in and plan out a marketing promotion. But you don't want to have to go in there and say, okay, the marketing promotion is, you know, in some state, and then it's in some other state, and so on. You want to be able to use terms and manage it in terms that make sense to you. So you put an effective date on it, right? You say this marketing promotion, or this whatever it is that I've just worked on is effective dates from this date to that date, because that's a way of thinking about the deployment or the provisioning of this content in a way, in terms that are familiar to you. All right? So life cycle is important. It just needs to become implicit. Another thing we found with the studies, the user group studies that we did, was that that business people tend to think declaratively rather than functionally, procedurally. You know, they don't load a value from persistent store into memory and then increment it by 1 and then stick it back into the persistent store, right? They just say this column is that column plus 1. It's a statement of truth. It's not there's no flow in it, right? It's just a statement of truth. This column is always equal to that column plus 1, right? And that kind of declarative way of describing what they want to have happen is how business people think. They don't think functionally, get this column, add 1 to it, stick it in that memory spot over there. So getting your head around offering them a way to explain what they want to achieve declaratively is a hurdle for us functional, procedural thinking people. So bear that in mind. Incremental development, right? Critical. It's all very well to be able to evolve the model, but I'm using it. I can't just like lose everything and like redeploy. I have to take my data and my evolved model along with me at every step. So you need to, as the creator of the platform, not allow transformations that are going to break your ability to bring the data with you. As the developer of the platform, do not allow an inconsistent state to appear. If somebody goes tweaking some part of the model, which then makes it inconsistent with some other state part of the model, you need to surface that at the time of the tweak and fix it and keep the model consistent. So at any point in time, the model is consistent. Right? So this is a way of like helping. There are things we can do with this kind of integration of model and data that we could never have done before, where we can seek out and we can understand relationships across the application that we as when the data and the model are separate, we couldn't have identified and prevented harm. So look for ways to take advantage of the fact that, we're only talking here about a single application, a single model. Think that the next level where we've got a platform that has a lot of applications deployed on it, and there are relationships between the applications. So now some other application is using this application, using the results column, right? Someone comes in and changes the way the results column is generated, right? Because we own the platform and we know about all the models of all of the applications on the platform, we can do some stuff that we couldn't do before. We can go in there and we can say, you're changing the way the total is calculated here. These are the applications that use the total from this application that you're changing. Just confirm that they're going to not be adversely affected by the way you're changing the way you're calculating the total. And so we can look for these relationships and we can provide a greater level of service to our users of our platform than if they were discretely built like Java applications or something that had their own life cycle and an independent life cycle. Okay, so I think I talked a bit there already about declarative and flow. So, in summary, most important thing to take away is understand who your user is, what their skill set is, what their objectives are, what their jargon is, their skill level, motivation, all that stuff, and to the extent possible, focus on a task, right? When I pick up, not that I have an iPhone anymore, but when I had an iPhone and I wanted to connect to an IP network, it was all just yes, done, right? Because Apple made a whole bunch of decisions for me. Do you want to use WEP? Do you want to use WAP? 128-bit key or 64-bit and all that. Never asked me any of that stuff, right? Just made all these assumptions, found out what it could off the network, made a bunch of assumptions. Sometimes got it wrong, but most of the time got it right. So the general experience with an Apple product is, that stuff just works. That's easy to use. I like it, right? Yeah, there's 1% of people hate it because it didn't work for them, you know, and maybe people like us, typically geeks, right, who said that's not how it should have worked, whatever. But you know, the average person, it was a big win. So that's the kind of thing, you know, ask yourself, what would Steve do? That's what I do. And just, you know, try to make as many assumptions along the way. If you know where the goal is, you can say, okay, I know where they're heading. How few questions can I ask them to get there, right? A platform's not situational until the user says it is. You know, that's what defines situationalness. Situationalness is whether they feel like they could just sit down and write code. I think that's basically, you know, we've covered the scope of what I wanted to talk about here. Happy to take any kind of questions. There's a friend of mine told me one time, because I'd done a few presentations, he said, look, you've got to expect 3 kinds of questions, right? There's excellent questions, right, which he defined as excellent questions are questions I'm going to cover on the next slide. And he said, there's another kind of question, it's a good question, and that is a question that I know the answer to. And he said, then there are interesting questions. So I'll take any of those 3 questions, kinds of questions.
I know this is a bad question, or whether it fits in any categories. It struck me when you were saying like the difference between just clarity and procedural didn't seem like the fitting my intuition of what I think situational applications seem like. It seems like their strength is that mostly they're applied to concrete data sets. Like they're not solving arbitrary problems. Like I think of the folks who in our office environments who work in these kinds of tools, they know how they take one data set and they build a spreadsheet that works from it. If you wanted to then say, give me that spreadsheet, I'm going to put a different data set into that spreadsheet, it's not going to work at all, right? It's like, it's because it's a concrete set of problems. That the procedural declarative distinction seems like it's a different thing than concrete and abstract, right? It seems like the problem is that there's a real shift to go from concrete problem solving to abstract problem solving, and that seems like where, to me, like the biggest separation is why this is such a hard problem, right? It's like solving concrete, not too hard. Solving abstract, but letting the user solve abstract seems to be largely unsolved problem, right? I mean, you know, good stuff, this is all around the right lines, but it seems like that's where, you know, domain-specific languages, I mean, all this stuff, right, is all kind of trying to figure that out, and it doesn't seem like anyone's really solved it yet.
Right, so the point being made here, if I could paraphrase, and you can tell me where I'm going totally off the rails. The point being made here is that, you know, solving a concrete problem, right, I need to add these 2 numbers together. Okay, that's a concrete problem, we can go and do that. Versus solving an abstract problem, which might be, you know, perform some mathematical function on some number of inputs or something like that, is, you know, so concrete is people can get their head around, they can solve. The abstraction of the problem is actually the architect's job, right? That's what architects do. They look at a requirement and then they step back and they say, what are we really trying to do here? And then they kind of break it down and they try to build out a system that, you know, has some versatility to it, right? That's the abstraction, is that breaking it down and saying, well, okay, I know you want me to add these 2 numbers today, but let me step back and try to figure out what you know, give you a platform that'll keep you going for a while. And the point made was that I didn't talk about here how we could solve abstract problems. It's only concrete problems that we were solving, giving the example of. And I think, and I apologize if I've missed that, but that was kind of the point, right? The point is, give everyone a platform on which they can build their concrete problem, a solution to their concrete problem. And if we have, you know, in terms of reusability, I think the example you gave was taking a model that we've created to solve one problem and then trying to apply some other.
Just another set of data. I mean, so if you do a spreadsheet that computes your average sales for the year,
Yep.
it won't work for my sales because I've got a different number of columns. So I just paste it into the spreadsheet.
Yep.
It's going to overwrite your sums because, you know, but you could build, if you're smart and you really know spreadsheets, you can build a smarter spreadsheet. But that's a different skill set, right?
Yeah,
that's
that's
the
right.
programmer of the.
Exactly.
Some people know how to do that. I don't know how to do
Yep.
that. They give me a spreadsheet that works, right? But I don't know how they do it.
Right.
It's a and it's because it seems to me it's because it's a concrete data set. It's like when it's a concrete problem, everybody can work that one. The abstract is a much. It seems like it's a fundamentally hard problem.
Making reusable applications is hard. making a
Yeah.
one-time use is
Right.
easy. I think part of what we're trying to solve with a situational application is, we agreed at the beginning, right, that we had no concerns for non-functionals, no upfront design, and no concern about return on investment. And maybe another thing that could be put in there is, no regard for reusability or anything like that. This is my problem, my application to solve my problem today now. I think what the transition, one of the things we've been thinking about is, and this happens a lot, right? People talk about spreadsheet where, my gosh, half the company runs on Excel. It's sure we got Oracle, but the company runs on Excel. And this is a big problem for a lot of companies. The other one that turns up a lot is Microsoft Access. Anything that didn't require the IT department, right? So they can sneak it in, and then they build. Jimmy down the corridor, the intern, came in, built this great application, and then Jimmy goes back to the college, right? And then they're on the phone to IT. This application keeps falling over. What application? The sales program management thing. What are you talking about? Well, I'll be right there. What is this? You guys are doing this? This is crazy. It's a violation of all these policies, blah, blah, blah. But we need it, if that goes away. And so this happens all the time. And, so one of the things we're looking at is how can we start situational and evolve into managed, right? So how can we want to present it in a way that's easy for users to grok and to use, but what we actually capture as the model underneath, we could spin whatever we want from that, right? We've built platforms that allowed very, loosey-goosey, entity model-y kind of stuff, and we captured it as a model, and we could spin out JavaScript and Java applications, run them on Tomcat, deploy them automatically, all sorts of stuff, and there's no reason why we couldn't have, at some point when somebody checks the box to, this is now important to the organization, why we wouldn't spit out some Java code, which was the template and the starting point for a managed IT cycle. Sorry, the first question was.
I don't think reuse is a big problem for users. I mean, you just take the sales_2009 XLS and copy it into the sales 2010 XLS.
Yeah.
Replace the values. So maybe it's more like a maintenance thing, or later you have like a different spreadsheet for each department, and then you need to go and you discover a mistake and you need to open 50 different spreadsheets and fix it,
Yeah.
get one of them.
Yeah, so governance on these applications is it's another function that the application platform needs to think about. And that's where I was saying, actually, if you own the platform and if you're capturing these models in a sensible way, like as a model before you spin out an actual, because of course there's there's probably n different ways that the platform could work. You could capture the model and then just execute the model. That's possible. Or you could capture a model and then generate artifacts and then run the artifacts. But either way, I strongly advocate that you capture a model and then perform analysis on the model, like we talked about. For governance purposes, who is reusing this? Who copied this thing? And if I change this, should I alert them? Hey, by the way, the copied thing that you made these changes, would you like me to make those changes for you as well? There's no reason why the platform couldn't do that. You have all the information you need to be able to do that. So those are the kinds of things that the platform should be looking to do. I think next we'll have, yeah.
So, your comment about the declarative and the governance, I mean, I think the main problem that most of us have with the classic situational applications, Word,
Yep.
Excel, Access, is the fact that no backup, no multi-user access, last right wins, violating all of the rules.
Network disaster. Yep.
Yeah, network disaster, and so your aspect about governance. And so to some extent, those of us who have decided that Google Docs is like the most wonderful thing in the world from the standpoint of documents, and spreadsheets and charting and stuff like that, it's like, it's because they have decided that this is not a single user thing, that I don't have to worry about where it's backed up and all that jazz.
Oh, they've solved a whole heap of problems. Yep.
Right, yeah. And I think that's the thing is that I think when most of us are complaining about Excel and the fact that the whole company runs on it, it's not because it's Excel per se, it's the fact that it doesn't have any backup, it doesn't have any multi-user capability.
Yeah, and putting that in the cloud does solve a lot of those things. It doesn't solve all of them because what can happen is we had a problem that someone came to us with, and it was an Excel spreadsheet that grew and grew and grew and grew until it wouldn't stand up anymore. And they had more hardware, bigger hardware, all that stuff, and then it just wouldn't stand up at all. And okay, so let's adopt an IT project to transform this Excel spreadsheet into an actual application because the company actually depends on it. And when I last checked in with that team, they were over a year into the project and had yet to even look in all of the cells to find the formulae, because the formulae, when you clicked on this on the cell and the formula pops up in the top thing, went off the screen. And you can't even cut and paste it. You have to cut, and then the rest of it cut. And it was so big and complicated. And of course, nobody in the company knew actually how it worked. So just actually trying to understand how the damn Excel application worked had consumed a year of the IT's time. So it's not just a matter of backup and concurrency and security and access control and all that sort of stuff, which it is about that. But it's also about, is that really an appropriate way to develop applications?
I would say that part about that you mentioned about protecting users from themselves, because there was a stat I saw one time that any spreadsheet that had more than 500 lines, there was like a 98 or 99%
Yeah.
probability that they had an error.
Yeah.
Because they don't do peer reviews. They don't do, they didn't document, which is what you just brought up, right? So it's how do you protect them from themselves and give them those things, or do you just let them prove it?
So that's a good question. The question was, okay, are end users really the right people to be developing any applications? Well, they are. They absolutely are. But it's our job to make that safe for them, right? Who knows about the Zappos fund, right? Where Zappos doing exactly the right thing, largely. They had broken out their rules that governed the pricing of certain things on their website into a separate rules management application. And instead of building it into the actual website that ran their shop. And unfortunately what happened was somebody who came in and intended to put several pairs of shoes on sale ended up putting all shoes on sale. And so you had these $2,000 shoes selling for $1,000. And so the internet is the internet, and Twitter, and all of a sudden they were down, I don't know, millions of bucks. Because of this, ungoverned rule change. So, what do we take away from that? End users shouldn't be allowed to touch it, or do we say the platform was not properly governed, right? Which is the correct, in my view, thing to think. What should have happened in that situation was the person making the change should have been presented with full disclosure of what the consequence of their change was going to be. These are the things I'm about to put on sale. Check, yes, no. Oh, goodness, no. Right? Back up, fix it, away we go. A good example that I've seen that I've not played with is technology that came out of a Seattle-based company, that ex-Microsoft guy who went up in this, he was like the first space tourist.
Yeah.
Intentional software as a
Intentional,
company.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
Chimes,
Simone,
yeah.
yeah. So his intentional software, they had this tool that Capgemini picked up, and what they did, which I thought was really cool, was that in the area where the actuaries in this case, were laying out the risk calculation for their insurance quotes that they were going to be handing out, they allowed the actuaries to write truth tables, right? So what happened was they would say, if these parameters are inputs to this equation, then the answer should be 0. If these are the inputs, then the answer should be 30%. If these are the inputs, it should be 50%. Blah. And they built a truth table that allowed them to then, whenever they made a change to the equation, it would pop up red or green to say, is your truth table still satisfied? Right? So that would then allow them to be nimble enough to go in, make a change to the thing, and still have some sanity check on the other side coming out, so that they had some governance over the changes they were making.
Isn't that called fit?
Sorry?
I think that's known in common parlance as FIT.
Fit.
Yeah. FIT.
Uh-huh. And what does that?
You basically make a table. If these are the inputs, then this should be the output.
Right.
It just tells you whether it's still right or not.
Exactly, yeah. So, and it was right co-located there, so when they made the change, they could immediately see whether they'd broken things. I think, yeah.
I think one of the issues is we tend to look at this from a developer's point of view. But as an employee of a big company, one thing I've noticed is every single internal application ever developed by any large company's IT shop is garbage. It's user hostile, it doesn't work, it's usually broken, and every single person who uses it hates it. From that, based on that, it doesn't surprise me that no rational employee ever wants to ask IT for anything, because they have evidence that tells them everything IT gives me will not do what I need it to do. So one of the problems is probably both bureaucracy and trust. It'll take IT forever to get the project approved, and when they finally actually start working on it, it'll be way out of date anyway, and when they finally give it to me, it won't work. So under those circumstances, why would I ask them for anything I actually need? If it's going to affect my business, they're the last people I want to talk to. So then one of the most endemic problems is to fix the IT and end user gap. Because if they don't talk to each other and they don't trust each other, they will never collaborate, and that governance problem will never go away. It'll only get worse.
Yeah. So, for the camera, we've brought up the fact that there's a lot of organizational problems that that we need that get in the way of a good IT and business relationship. And some companies that I've consulted to, it's been downright hostile. The relationship between the business teams and the IT that are supporting them. Yeah, this is not an easy problem, but there are various methodologies and things to try to bring the teams together, and I don't know that that's an easy problem for us to talk about at this point. It's a hard problem.
I know it's a hard problem. I don't know how to fix it either, but it's one I'd like to see fixed. Because the whole point behind being an IT developer is to solve business problems.
We're caught in this vicious cycle, right? We're caught in this vicious cycle of, in some companies, this is not a made-up stat. This is an actual, stat, and that is the smallest IT project costs $1 million. Right? To start an IT project costs $1 million. You know you're going to be $1 million before you get out the end. So what does that tell you? If I want to change the spelling of a word on a website, that can wait. If I want to, change something like that, whatever the problem is, right? I'm going to make sure I build up $1 million worth of change before I get on the phone to IT. But what's happening there is that I'm building up what I think is going to be $1 million worth of change, and it's all this random stuff, right? And then I call IT, and then I've got so much stuff that I say, here, I need you to fix all this. That IT says, well, this is not a small problem, this is like a big problem, and now I need to have all this machinery to start up, and because it's a lot of stuff, I miscalculate how long it's going to take. IT people are always too optimistic, and so it runs over budget, it runs over time, and then meanwhile the business people say, this happens every time, they run over time. Next time I'll make sure I have double the amount because it takes them twice as long, and with this vicious cycle where it's building on itself. So the solution is to make it possible to have a trivial change, right? To make it possible to just fix the spelling of that word on the website. I just want to change this one calculation. I just want to, and have that not cost $1 million, right? Have that cost something that is appropriate to that. And this notion of situationalness doesn't have to be applied at the business user level. Maybe it's the IT, maybe it's the business analyst, maybe it's the IT architect, maybe we can, in the same as the concepts of 4GLs and so on, we have to figure out how to wrap that and not lose process there's a lot of things to sort out. But the idea of making small changes cost little is what's missing, right? I think if we can have a lot more iterations that are shorter, that will go a way to addressing this problem that we have at the moment where things are the changes are too big in scope. Sorry.
No, I had no question. It was just
Oh, that's okay.
problem that I see with the whole situational programming is it's great to have a tool which lets your user work on a problem. But at some point, you always get to a situation like the spreadsheet you described, where the tool has been carried about an order of magnitude beyond where the capabilities it was designed to handle by somebody who may very well not know any better tools. And this is, I think, a great danger of putting a gun like this in the hands of your users.
I prefer to think of it as a length of rope.
All right, even better analogy. Yes. Right, the length of rope in the hands of your users is you can do wonderful things with it, but you can hang yourself too.
Yes, and so the point being made is that, if we put this power in the hands of the users, will they use it for good or for evil? Right? And
It's not necessarily good or evil.
No, I understand.
It's
They'll
will
take
they,
it.
will they attempt to do something
They'll
that's
try to do
beyond-
something awesome, whereas
Right.
they're really only capable of doing something good. Yeah. And once they shoot like that and they take it too far, then the tool is going to fall over. In the case of the example given was Excel. You build out this crazy big Excel spreadsheet, and then it becomes everyone's problem. And that's a good point. But there's no reason why the platform shouldn't have the smarts built into it to say, warning flags, people are taking this too much. We've identified that your macros are longer than 1,000 characters. Let's talk about it. As you're the platform developer, as you start to identify the characteristics of things that are going off the rails, no reason why you shouldn't be flagging that. Yep.
Yeah, I think the thing that we're missing here, it seems to me, is that, it's for me, it's not the quality of the bricks so much as the quality of the brick layers, right? I mean, we talk about, and Steve was just talking about the user as some dumb element that doesn't really know what they're talking about. They may have business knowledge or domain knowledge that is useful, but it's the application developers are the ones that really know how to put this stuff together. And it seems to me what you need is some hybrid of that some person that knows the domain well enough that they really know what all the rules are, but they also have the ability to say, this is how we can arrange this so that it can be useful. We can arrange an application on one of these platforms, and maybe I'm well versed enough in this platform that I can do it quickly, so that I can. And that person, I think, is the most important aspect of all of this. If you don't have a person that knows this kind of stuff and knows when they're getting in over their head, even, right? Like Excel can't handle this anymore. I need to do something better than this. Then that's what departments really need to have.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, right? To make sure that we're not being overly ambitious with what we're trying to achieve with the platform to the point where, we have a dependency, but an unmet dependency on some application dev kind of thinking applied to the problem. So perhaps having the platform target an area that's very well defined, for which we have supporting building blocks that are well engineered, that are well thought through and can scale and can do all the things that we would normally add to the equation as IT people, and then only really allow the way these things are arranged and some very kind of controlled variants on an otherwise well understood scenario. Yep.
I'm a little bit confused here because when you started the talk, you're talking about non-functional, let's get the job done, don't go into too much design work here.
Yep.
But yet, at the end, you're expecting this application to be able to do all sorts of funny things without very much, work in the design of your architecture to be able to do that stuff.
Absolutely.
So it's like you're kind of going along and get something up really quick, but don't, all of a sudden you got to make sure it's really modular, really functional, and provides all these functions to the user without taking the time to do your basic design and get good modularity and get good
base to develop with.
Okay,
Because
so I want
it
to.
seems like you have a dichotomy here.
That's a good observation. So the observation was at the beginning of the talk, we were talking about the three things that defined the situational application were no upfront design, no regard for non-functionals, and no regard for return on investment. And now we're talking about how this thing has to scale and all the rest of it. So I want to be careful that we understand the distinction between the situational application, which has those characteristics, and the platform on which it's built. The platform has to be able to scale to the degree that the users of the platform and the users of the situational applications built on the platform need it to. The situational application platform has to be very well thought through, very modular, very well designed, and support all of the required non-functional aspects of the applications. The application developer, which is now the end user, say, but I keep using that as an example. I mean, it may be a C programmer. I mean, whoever it is that is your target audience doesn't want to be thinking about those things. The target audience does not want to be thinking about the return on investment, blah, 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 that stuff. So let's not, situational application platform absolutely has to be well designed and scaled. It's like, take the example of the Google Docs spreadsheet, right? As the user of the Google Docs spreadsheet, I want security, I want scalability, concurrency, I want to have, backup, all that stuff. But I don't want to have to deal with it. I just want it to work.
Well, as an application developer, though, it's providing this. You do have to do that. You do have to design for it. You do have to be able to put in the development work that's going to be needed in order to provide that functionality.
If I was building Google Docs, I would have to build that in.
Well, I thought that's what we were talking about, because as developers, that's what I look at anyway.
We kind of, the conversation keeps kind of switching between the applications and the platform. But if you're building the platform, you need to worry about that stuff. If you're just an application developer, which is not the platform, this is I'm using the spreadsheet, I'm not building Google Docs, right? So if I'm using the spreadsheet in Google Docs, then I don't have to worry about concurrency and all that.
Is it conceptually just like, EJV is supposed to get us away from all the low-level stuff and things like that? I mean, would that be a similar analogy, I suppose?
At some level, EJB analogy may be correct. I think it's fair to argue that EJB doesn't completely encapsulate all of the complexity. There's a whole lot of things that can go wrong with EJB. So you have to understand before you can, a number of customers I've helped out.
So that's kind of where I'm going, though, is that, I mean, on one hand, you're trying to constrain the environment a little bit and, give the user the ability to implement their business processes, whatever they need to, without worrying about the underlying complexities. But the problem is the complexity is still there. You're sort of trying to either hide them, not I would say hide them, but provide a mechanism for the user to be able to deal with those complexities, I guess, without having to think about them. But that's like, it just doesn't work, I guess. So, I mean...
No, well, it totally
I'm
works.
quite confused now.
I'm not sure. If you're building an application and, take an example, for example, I was going to use the example of the Google payment system that they've just released, right? I sound like I'm obsessed with Google. That's my joke. Okay. And they just released this payment system, right, which is for people who are publishing content. For example, digital media or newspapers or magazines or some kind of digital content. And you can, as the publisher, choose your payment model. You can charge by subscription, monthly subscription. You can charge by all-you-can-eat content for the access to all-you-can-eat. You can charge per issue. You can, there's different ways to charge. And I mean, from the implementation perspective, the reason I hesitated bringing this up is because there's probably a whole other slew of problems you have to deal with if you're changing your model that much. But from an implementation perspective, you're actually just checking a box inside the Google mechanism. So you've changed your business model from a subscription business model to a per issue or to a paid by the month all you can eat, which is a pretty big change in business model by checking a box, right? So, your point previously was, you're hiding that complexity, but the complexity is still there. Yeah, but Google solved it. It's sorted. Your ability to charge by the month, your ability to charge per issue and all that stuff, they've figured that out. You don't have to worry about that. As the user of the application, check. Now, as the user of the application, you have salespeople who think one way and now have to start thinking a different way. So there's like all kinds of organizational go-to-market problems associated with it too. But from like an implementation perspective, you didn't have to worry about it.
Yeah, but as a developer, you do.
No, the developer is the business user.
Google had to sit down and decide, okay, what is their user base? How are they going to, what options do they need?
Absolutely.
What kind of interface and functions are going to do? What are the checkboxes?
Yep.
And then, okay, given that as input, what do we need to do in order to support that?
Absolutely. If you are the developer of the platform, you definitely need to worry about
Well,
it.
that's what I thought your talk was, is as a developer, you're looking at the user, you're trying to find their, put yourself in their place and,
You're
and
absolutely right.
understand their problem sets.
Yes.
And then you go around and start developing and providing them with the tools in order to do that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So that's all, I think that's
But-
consistent with
But
what...
my problem is you don't do that ad hocly.
Well, that's not,
But
the
there's
person
two
working ad hoc is the person building the situational application, not the developer who built the platform.
But
The problem comes from the people doing ad hoc development that gets out of control. And most of the situational development platforms don't do anything to mitigate or manage that.
It's
It's not the
it's the
developer's
situational application.
You're confusing because the pointy head guy, he's talking, that's a developer too.
There's two roles.
So,
Right.
actually,
Yeah.
the way I understood it is there are two types of developers. There's a platform developer that publishes the platform. Like, for example, there was one screen before that there was a Google Mail or something that you have all bunch of widgets, right? And then you, as a situational application developer, you just arrange these widgets how you want it, right? So then you can do it ad hoc, but all the complexity of how they work, how
So
they
we're
preserve
looking at
data.
3 different levels here, where the end user doesn't have
Maybe two.
much input here, and you have some other user
No,
that's
they're just two
configuring
levels.
it.
End user is the one who actually builds that you as a platform developer, you enabled him or her to build this application for
It's
itself.
a power
Platform
user.
application is
Empower.
the middle person, and
There-
somebody
there
else has
could be-
already done the
It
bottom.
could be 3, yeah.
There could be N roles, right, as per your design. But I mean, the simplest case, we have the generative case is 2. And we have the person who's building what I call a situational application, right? That's the end user. That's the business person. And what may be confusing things here is the use of the word application there, but they're the ones that don't have to worry about anything. They're just checking boxes and doing stuff that they're comfortable doing. And then you have someone else who's building the platform, spreadsheet, the desktop, whatever it is that we're calling the platform. And they need to be geniuses, right? Genii, whatever the plural genius is, right? So yeah, those guys have to think it all through. They have to figure out, and that's what I kept saying previously. They have to know who these people are that are building this stuff. As you pointed out, they have to figure out what checkboxes they need, how to go build all that stuff, all the, how to render it so they can use it. Yeah, that's a big task. There's no doubt about it. Yep.
So we mentioned people that use Excel and they don't know when to stop. Does anyone know of any organizations who sort of intentionally cripple their Excel, so like if a formula gets too long, there's quickly popping up and saying, sorry Dave, I can't do that, or like the IT department has been notified and will arrive shortly.
Sirens, yeah. I've not heard of people actually messing with the Excel code, but certainly from a policy perspective, what can and can't go into Excel spreadsheets is certainly, I've seen that implemented in different companies.
So, focusing on one of the things you said earlier about declarative versus and sort of avoiding the functional, it seems to me that what you're describing as sort of our disasters are where the people started off doing a little bit of declarative and they slipped into being functional,
Yeah.
functional in the framework, and then along those lines, we sort of take this attitude that says, well, if we could just get programmable, our domain experts who can program, we can write this tool that they still have to do functional work, but it's not the hard stuff. It's just the glue. And the only thing I would say is that any domain expert who's any good at programming has turned themselves into a programmer because it's a much easier way to make a living.
Yeah, that may be so. I always felt frustrated at the conferences that I would go to, and I see the salesperson walk across the stage and get the banknotes wrapped in the Rolex and stuff, and I think, I saved your butt at that gig. That's mine. I don't know. It seems like they had the easy job, but yeah, I think there's a level of governance that has to be figured out, and I don't know that anyone's figured it out, but you can imagine a situation where you build in refactoring, right? You say, okay, you can type in whatever formula you want into that space, but it's got to fit on a Twitter, right? It's got to be 140 characters. Once you get to 140 characters, what happens is we recognize the need that what you're typing in ought to be some feature that built into the platform, right? You've gone off into the woods. You're building the platform now. You're not using the platform. You're extending the platform. So let's look at what you're trying to do, figure out if it's general, figure out what we can do. Is it, do we have our Tiger team come in and build you the one-off function? Remember we had that category called function? Are we really building a function that's a little extension of the platform for you? Okay, let's go do that. And now we'll have IT figure out how to do that. And you can now, with one line, with one command, do that stuff you were trying to code in Excel Basic or whatever the heck it is, right? I'll go and cut it in Java, expose it as a new function, and now you can just do it rather than, and then we'll manage it and all the rest of it. Or is what you're doing interesting more broadly? Right now I've got my architect hat on, I step back and I go, maybe what you're trying to do is interesting, right? So maybe we should actually extend the platform with that capability and then everyone can use it. So, building in this automatic need for refactoring by constraining what they can get away with.
There is another possibility, which is that it's the wrong platform. And if your formulas are becoming that complicated, maybe you should move
Right, maybe
from
we had, the
Excel
point
and
is
start
maybe we've
using
missed the target
Mathematica.
user. Maybe our target user is someone different and they're trying to do different things from what we built the platform to be able to do.
So to follow up on something that George was saying, I mean, it might be that maybe when you think that what people are good at is the declarative information, it's because the tools that we have today support the declarative. I mean, there's sort of an argument that suggests that actually people are much better at the procedural. But I mean, like, the classic, so you said, like, what makes you a great salesperson, right? If you ask somebody declaratively to describe that, they're probably wrong, right? Even if they are a salesperson, and even if they are a great salesperson, they're probably very good at doing the sales thing. They're probably very poor at actually converting that procedural information into declarative information. Like, what is it that I do to make that happen? And that goes back to, some of the time in my distant past worked on the knowledge acquisition problem. How do you take knowledge out of somebody who knows it and get it into this form? That's how I asked you about the concrete, because it seems like domain experts understand concrete problem solving. They're good salespeople because you give them a sales problem and ask them to come into this room and sell you on it, they'll just do it. But if you ask them, how did you do that? How do you extract that information? They can't tell you because they don't actually know. It's not in their brains. It's not a question of the right tool. So it might be that you're sort of, if you think about the problem as how to build the right tool that gets really good at declarative stuff, it's almost like that's what we've got today. Might not be really what the end users really need, which is maybe these entirely different categories of tools that are more focused around procedurals, and that suggests more that the application developer's job is to extract information from, presenting people with problems and having them solve problems and extracting the information out of it. It's just an entirely different kind of platform than the very declarative things. I mean, Google Docs, classic
You're making
declarative
a great
writing.
point, right? So one of the things that we've come up with is, like, imagine pairing a platform like this with a services offering, right? I mean, you can imagine some point in time where we tune Watson, and instead of playing Jeopardy, it goes off and it does this kind of conversation with people. But in the meantime, we have somebody turn up and have that dialogue that you just talked about. Okay, so tell me about how the airport runs. Oh, you have these planes come in, and planes. Oh, planes, okay. And what do? They land, and where do they land? Land is something a plane does, okay. And, we have this conversation, and you don't know how to decompose stuff, and maybe I don't know your domain and so on, but together we kind of tease out this information. And, and so understanding the target audience and the target problem space and so on is going to lead you to build the the right platform, which may come with a person in the box.
I know agile is a dirty word, but does small, iterative, short delivery work better?
I don't think there's any other way. Agile's not a dirty word for me.
No, we use it. I love it.
Yeah. No, I think that the problem, as I stated previously, I think one of the problems that we have that causes a lot of misunderstanding and miscommunication between business and IT is that our cycles are too big. We need to contain them. We need to make them smaller and cheaper and faster, so that everything is, if I have to predict how long it takes to change a word on a website, I can do that. But if I so just make them smaller, more contained, manageable iterations. I think is critical.
Frequent
The
delivery.
example that we use all the time is this Java garbage collector.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the C language, you have the pointer to a block of data.
Yeah.
And so the language, so the running environment can't do anything for you. Whereas by hiding that from you in Java, now somebody can write a garbage collector, you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
So that's where this situation kind of comes into this.
Except when you have to pay someone like me to figure out why your app doesn't work.
But in general,
Not that I'm complaining.
Yeah, but that's kind of speaking to the point made earlier, right? So we've abstracted a way to make it easier for Java programmers. Or I can promise you, as a C++ programmer migrating to Java, I hated the fact that I didn't have control over my memory anymore. but it's easier now because people who didn't grow up seeing, reading all of the Bjorn Strastrup books and getting into how to manage memory in C++, saw C++ memory management as a bunch of rope, which they would invariably trip over and hang themselves in. And so along came, the right people, and we built Java with memory management. And the problem is, per the comment, right, that carries baggage, right? So then you try to write yourself a music score playing application, music playing application in Java, and it goes la di da di da di da di da di da di da di da, right? So why is it doing this? No, memory garbage collector kicking in every now and then. So you need to have you have to understand the target market for your platform, and if one of the requirements is that it be able to be real time, then you pick a real time JVM, which there are, but not all of them are, and so. How are we doing?
Steve's got one question.
Hey, Steve.
You were talking earlier about the checkbox in Google Payment that
Yep.
allows you to switch your payment on. And a checkbox is a wonderful thing, but it isn't a situational application. The thing that distinguished every one of those situational applications is at some point in the application development, the user gets to type some text, which will be interpreted as a script or a formula or something. In effect, its own computer language. And the minute you give the user the ability to type text, you've given them a lot of power, and you've also opened up a rat's nest.
Yep.
And an Excel spreadsheet and HyperCard, which is one of my favorite situational applications, particularly because the textbook HyperCard was written by a 6-year-old kid. Shows what the user can do. But the minute you give the users the ability to script, they have their own language, and they're in effect a small computer programmer and can get themselves in as much trouble as we can.
Yeah. So the point is that to the extent that let me address a couple of different things that you said there. First, you asserted that it wasn't really a situational application because it didn't have text, and I want to push back on that and say that my definition of a situational application platform is itself an application which allows its users to perform a task with some control over the task model, right? Some control over the task model. These are the aspects of the task model that I called out: data, flow, decisions, rules, user interface, and so on. So if I can change the user interface, probably, the rules, probably, the flow, definitely, probably the eventing and the reporting and monitoring for sure, with a checkbox, more power to me. The platform rules, right? Why should I have to type text? doesn't, by my definition, define a platform.
So go back to the slide with your list of your situational applications.
These are not situational
No,
applications,
no,
right?
not that one, right.
Okay.
Spreadsheets, desktop databases, collaboration suites.
No, these are
managed
platforms,
jobs.
right? These are popular platforms.
Right, okay, fair enough.
Yeah. So these are platforms that allow me to build situational applications on. And then you had another point, which was a good point, which is to say that, you know, as soon as we give them control and we give them the ability to just, you know, write macros or whatever it is we want to allow them, however we want to allow them to affect the model. So, you know, look at Excel, right? This is where they can get into a lot of trouble, right? Because it's kind of unconstrained. But that's the point. We need to constrain that, right? And I've given you some examples as we talked about, constrain it to a certain number of characters, right? Because you know it's getting out of control when it gets big.
They'll hate you if you do it.
They will love me when I come and extend the platform and they can do it in one
Cause
word.
another-
Any jobs?
The old adage to err is human, to really screw up requires the help of a computer.
All right. Any other questions, comments? Guess with that we'll call it a night. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.